If you want to blend in with everyone else, then do what everyone else is doing. If you want to stand out, create your own brand, then approach it through a different lens. Be unique, be memorable, create content that adds value, educates, and informs. Once you give yourself permission to do these things, that's where the magic happens.
Law school taught you the law, but it didn't teach you this, how to connect. Be that one lawyer who shows up different, the one clients trust, the one they never forget. I'm Neil Goldstein, and this is That One Lawyer Podcast. Let's get started. Our guest today is a trial lawyer who didn't just adapt to the digital age, he helped shape it. Mitch Jackson has been practicing personal injury law in California for over 30 years, but what sets him apart is how early he embraced live streaming, social media, and personal branding as tools for connection. He's the author of The Ultimate Guide to Social Media and a true pioneer in humanizing law through technology. Mitch, welcome to That One Lawyer Podcast. And by the way, just to show you that I'm not just blowing smoke, this is the book that I got. I think it was in 2019. You see all of these? These are Post-it notes. This is what we used to do before technology really came out. And look how many Post-it notes I have on this book. It was a great collaboration between you and so many experts that worked with you on that book. Really good book. Anyway, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, my friend. Neil, it's been way too long. Look, it's all about relationships, right? Before we went live, we were talking about a couple of old social media, live video platforms that aren't around anymore. But we're still here because of the relationships. That book, I believe, came out around 2017, right? And because of the relationships that I had built over the years, I was able to reach out to the top 50 or 60 experts in all the different platforms and all the different communication techniques. And they were kind enough to contribute chapters into my book, which is the only reason that book happened. I don't know how you found the time to come out with your books, okay? They're so good. I know how much time and effort it takes, but I personally couldn't have done that book, Neil, had it not been for the relationships. And that's why, they're so darn important in what we do.
And I have to tell you, just about every piece of content in that book is still applicable today. Not even a question. So this is not a book that's about to be outdated because of technology. So let's get right into it. First of all, I remember when I first met you. I think I saw you for the first time in Dallas at a PILMA event, and you were talking about Periscope and you were talking about newsjacking. And when you showed the group of us, and there was a lot of people there, about Periscope, which I think was ultimately bought out by Twitter, I was amazed. And I was amazed that anybody was even talking about this. Then you talked about newsjacking, which was pretty new to me. And you just had it all. So my first question is, I have so many. My first question is, first, can you give us a little bit about your background? Give us your backstory, if you will.
Absolutely. And I think backstories and storytelling, that's what it's all about. That's what resonated, I think, the two of us, learning about you growing up, dropping out of high school, things with your mom. It really kind of showed me the human side of you as a lawyer. And what I was sharing way back at that event, wow, Neil, you're really dating the two of us. That was a long time ago, is I was trying to share growing up on a guest ranch in Tucson, Arizona, that my mom and dad owned, and people coming out every year, the same families, the same guests, playing cowboy and cowgirl, riding horses, doing all the things that we would do on the ranch. And I noticed that was happening because of the relationships that my mom and dad would build with the guests. And, their kids and I all grew up, and my sister and I all grew up together. And it just really resonated with me on how important it is when you're building a business, when you're building a practice, to really focus on the relationships. When you saw me at that event in Texas, what I was trying to get across to everybody is to focus on the relationships, but use these new technologies to do so in a new and unique way, in a way that other lawyers weren't creating and nurturing and building these relationships, and while also adding value and creating interest and creating memorable social media content. So I was trying to take that relationship component with this new live video component, which was called Periscope back in the day, and show people how you can use this to connect and really have fun practicing law.
Yeah, well, you obviously, you were ultimately though attracted to the digital world. And so was there something that happened? I mean, you're from my understanding is that, you do mostly personal injury work and you do a lot of other things. And then all of a sudden you decided to take on digital and AI like nobody that I've ever seen. And so
Mm.
what caused you to make that pivot?
Competition and a little bit of interest. And what I mean by that is I opened up my practice from day one back in 1986 and was competing against some of the best and largest law firms really in the world. Orange County, California, Los Angeles, California, and where you are, New York, obviously, Chicago. We have some huge, very successful firms and very talented lawyers. And so starting my practice, what I tried to do those first 4 or 5 years, Neil, was to be like everyone else and do the same ads in the monthly lawyer magazines, right? And attend the local bar review meetings and things like this. But it was hard to stand out in that type of environment. And towards the later 80s, early 90s, what I noticed as the internet started rolling around, and let's just fast forward to about 1994, 1995, I noticed that there was this thing called the internet and things called websites. And what I also noticed was I was adding what we now call blog posts, but participating in bulletin boards and sharing my thoughts and content in a way where instead of just talking to one person sitting across my desk, which is very, very important in today's world, don't get me wrong,
Right.
but all of a sudden I was reaching, a dozen people, maybe 30 people, maybe 50 people. And fast forward another 10 years to, 2008 to about 2012, we were hopping on shows and leveraging live video shows and doing blog posts and videos where we would have thousands or tens of thousands of people on these shows back in the day.
Right.
And I've never been accused, and you've heard me say this before, of being the brightest bulb in the lamp. But what I realized was it allowed me to start interacting with more people, having an opportunity to create more long term, meaningful relationships with people that I otherwise would have never met, including you, right? And also adding a unique twist or value to the message I was sending. So if I was talking about a breaking news story, it allowed me to get in front of literally hundreds of reporters who were
Right.
following these stories on Twitter back in the day for interviews. If I was talking about a particular, we do business litigation too, a business litigation case, it raised awareness in my local and national communities that my firm handles these types of cases. So for all those reasons, Neil, it was a business decision back in the day. What can I do to stand out? And the takeaway on this particular topic, I feel, is if you want to blend in with everyone else, then do what everyone else is doing. If you want to stand out, create your own brand, do the things that you talk about in your book, then approach it through a different lens. Be unique, be memorable, create content that adds value, educates, and informs. And do it in a way where it's even slightly entertaining. And I
Right.
think once you give yourself permission to do these things, that's where the magic happens. That's where the fun happens. And you've been practicing law a long time. I've been practicing law a long time. I still enjoy getting up in the morning, Neil, and helping clients.
Right.
There's nothing else like it. I think it's
Right.
the best profession in the world. So I think it's working.
I saw a YouTube video of you in an interview, and I don't remember whose it was. Maybe it was Pete, he's a screen lawyer or something. And
Pete Salsick.
yeah, Pete Salsick, and you had talked about the time that you went into a courtroom with your laptop. I guess and this was before digital was accepted by the legal industry. And it wasn't that long ago, although I guess it seems that way in the digital world that we live in. And I guess you were going to do some kind of presentation by way of your laptop, and the judge looked at you and said, "Hey, what's that?" And whatever you said, and he says, "Nah, that ain't going on in here." And you said nicely, you said, "Okay, great." Could you ever have imagined that in a relatively short amount of time, it would go from that to now having all kinds of conferences and mediations digitally, which I'm not a great fan of, but I understand why people do it, but a complete 360, right?
It Things certainly have changed over the years.
Right.
especially when the pandemic hit.
Right.
And, I had lawyers calling me back then. Hey, Mitch, what is this Zoom thing? Is it like a telephone call on the internet? I mean, that's where we started
Right.
back in
Right.
the,
Right.
and, it's funny. I was setting up the laptop. It was a morning break. Jury was out of the courtroom. The judge was up on the bench doing something. And I'm just setting up a laptop to complement, late 80s, by the way. This is
Right.
late 80s,
Right.
an opening statement. And he's like, long story short, you're not using that in my courtroom. What is that? You're not using it. Fast forward to today, when we walk into a courtroom, can you imagine not using technology? I mean,
Right.
it's just, it might even be considered malpractice, right?
Right. Right.
And it's interesting to push yourself to try new things, whether in today's world, having conversations like this on live video. What if something happens? What if you say something wrong? What will people think about you, right?
Right.
They're going
Right.
to think that you're a human being. They're going to understand that you care about what you're saying. And not all of us put together the right thoughts and the right sentences at the right time. I mean, that's what's allowed me to win some really big cases, is that
Right.
I was always that person that
Right.
was building relationships with my jury. And I think lawyers in today's world that embrace this technology keep the human element in the picture, especially when using artificial intelligence. They're the lawyers that are laying that foundation. The lawyers today that are starting to figure out AI are the same lawyers that were in that courtroom back in the late 80s introducing what was called a laptop to that particular judge. That's
Right.
where we are, and we need to double down, not push away from the technology.
I agree with you. One of the things that I liked about
Did I
this
get you all
book.
choked up there, Neil?
No, I'm okay. One of the things that by the way, look at that picture of you on that book.
Oh my God. Back in the day, my friend.
You look great. But one of the things that seems to that resonated with me in the book, not only from you, but from all of your collaborators there, was that they talked about using digital in a way that helps your authenticity. And so you said something, I believe you said something like, you first have to be authentic with yourself before you could be authentic in the digital world. And so can you explain to the people that are going to be watching and listening to this, what does that mean to you?
It means exactly what you and I are doing right now. For those of you not watching this video and you're listening to the podcast, Neil is in a sharp, what color shirt is that, Neil?
Pink.
Is that a pink shirt, which I love? It's a great looking pink shirt, button down. I'm in a black Nike sweat top with a blue shirt underneath. I'm going to go for a run as soon as we're done. I'm meeting some neighbors out front. We're being real. We're being human. We're not in our expensive suits and ties, right? We don't need to be right now. I have no problem with that, but didn't feel like we needed to do it today.
Right.
And I think that if you're not speaking from the heart in the courtroom, if you're not being real when it comes to how you're creating your relationships, whether it's in person, in your office, across from your desk, or having lunch with a potential client or a potential referral source, or creating content for social media, if you're not being as human as possible, people are going to figure it out. And it's so much easier to be yourself than it is to try to be someone else. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm going to be really honest. When I first started doing all of this, I was trying, my first case, I tried 6 months out of law school, passing the bar, Neil. I was speaking and acting and trying to come across like the lawyers who I watched in the courtroom. See, I was one of those guys where when I was a law clerk, I'd go down to the courthouse and I'd file a lawsuit or I'd pick up some paperwork and then I'd swing into a courtroom and watch the lawyers trying the case. That's what I used to do. And I used to watch some really well-known famous lawyers trying cases. And I thought that's the way I needed to be. But Neil, it felt, even though I won my first case, it felt fake. I felt like imposter syndrome. It didn't feel good or genuine. And I continued doing that for a couple of years, right? I tried a lot of cases. And finally, I came across one of Jerry Spence's VHS tapes. If those of you don't remember Jerry Spence, Google him. The cowboy lawyer with the fringe.
Right.
Never lost a criminal case.
Right.
And back in the day, we had this thing called VHSs where you pop the tape in the television and watch it. I listened to Jerry explaining how to do jury selection, opening statements, and closing arguments. He talks about speaking from the heart. Be yourself. And if you ever look at Jerry's written transcripts, they don't make any sense. When you read what he says in court, it's not organized. It's kind of jumps all over the place. But here's where he came across really, really well. When he was standing in front of a jury, they trusted him. They knew that he cared about his client. And those are really important elements when you're a lawyer or when you're building relationships. And so once I gave myself permission, Neil, to do that, I'd say in the early 90s, everything else kind of came together. And the results speak for themselves. I mean, I really want lawyers to really double down on who they are and embrace it. Don't push it away.
So how do you feel about technology that now has, I don't want to say done away with the courtroom, but let's be honest, most of the mediations that I see, those that I'm involved in, are done digitally. They're not done in person anymore. Some are.
Really? Really?
Most
Okay.
court conferences are, not all, but most are done digitally. Uh,
Hmm.
Depositions, most are done digitally. Even if they,
Mm.
even if the adversary is 20 minutes from you, most are done digitally. The only thing that I haven't seen yet are actual trials. So my question to you is: do you think there's a place for human skills, face-to-face contact, and there's no digital? I mean, is everything going to be digital? Is that okay with you?
It's not okay with me. And I know
Right.
in your five principles in your first book, you talk about valuing face-to-face interactions. And I still think that's a huge, important variable when it comes to building rapport, understanding who you're dealing with, and closing deals. And let me just share a couple of thoughts with you. Even though we have the option of doing a Zoom deposition or appearing via Zoom in our court conferences, which we have here in California, on my important cases, I want to sit across from the person whose deposition I'm taking. I want to see how they react. I want to know everything about that person. And so most of those types of things we're still insisting that we do live. It's our option, right? We're not stipulating to a Zoom depo. But I will tell you that because of the convenience of, for example, Zoom, and because of the convenience of technology, that's fantastic. It allows us to have a more enjoyable, flexible lifestyle, which I
Right.
really, really like.
Right.
But we can use our human skills to connect better in our Zoom videos. For example, right now, and I'm not sure how it's coming across with you, but right now I'm speaking and looking into the camera lens. And I
Right.
hope it comes across like I'm looking at you right in the eye. I'm
Yes.
not down here looking at your video right now, which maybe might look like I'm not paying attention to the conversation.
Right.
And I'm using my hands when I speak, right? I
Right.
want people to know that I'm engaged. We're using voice inflection. We're pacing ourselves. These human characteristics that we learn how to do in court, we can use on the digital platforms to connect better and faster. And so I think it's just depends on who you are. The first chapter in the book that you were kind enough to mention was written by Bob Berg, the co-author of the Go-Getter and the Go-Getter series of books, right? And there
Yep.
was a reason why I wanted Bob to be the first chapter, because it has to do with connecting with other human beings. And even though this book was about all the different social media platforms and communication approaches, and the third section of that book, Neil, is my favorite. It's all about how to communicate. It's not really about the platforms. It's about how to tell a story. It's about how to build rapport using bullet points, using metaphors, using analogies when explaining what you're doing. But Bob in the first chapter set the tone for the whole book. And what he did is he basically said, listen, embrace the go-giver type of attitude and be a human being when using these platforms. And if you do, you're going to separate yourself from everyone else. So my challenge right now, Neil, is taking your question to the next level. How can we maintain that human aspect of what we're doing when we're using artificial intelligence? Or if I'm in the metaverse as an avatar, which I am, how can we connect and build rapport and communicate in the same effective way as if you and I were sitting across the table having lunch together? And it's not easy, right?
No,
But
no.
it's
I say honestly, not to interrupt you, but
please do.
I remember
Mhm.
when you first talked about the metaverse, and
Mhm.
I remember we were in a mastermind group, and we were just chatting. We were all chatting about that, and I said to you, now this is when it first came out. I said, Mitch, look, you gave us a link to figure out how to do the metaverse and how to walk around in the metaverse, and I did that, and I said, I don't even have any shoulders. I have no arms, and I'm going to meet a client. I'm going to meet a client. What client wants to meet me in this cartoon series? So now I
Hmm.
understand. I understand it might have gotten. It's a lot better now. Things are different, but as you said, and again, the reason why I've read this books and I've referenced it so many times is because you believe that underlying all of this is authentic, genuine relationships. Got it. But it seems like that, obviously digital is expanding. And I'm not sure that you can equate doing a conference online, digitally the same way you could do it in person. Can you still get across authentically in a digital way? Maybe. But you can obviously do it much better in person, correct?
No argument here, but there is a caveat. And that caveat is, as you know, I've been on stage twice at Tony Robbins Business Mastery, and there's thousands of people in the
Yeah.
audience, and it's an amazing experience. Having said that, I've also been on stage and participated in events in the metaverse where we've had thousands of people in the audience. And if you're wearing, for example, an Oculus headset, okay, a
Right.
MetaQuest headset,
Right.
3, 4, $500, and you're engaging with this audience, and let's just say a majority of them are wearing that headset too, it feels like you're there. There's a certain intimate connection that happens that a lot of people who haven't experienced this, they're not going to know what I'm talking about.
Right.
It's such a real experience that HR departments who are using these virtual technologies are writing into their HR policies. Listen, what applies offline applies within these spaces. It's a really interesting dynamic, and I see it actually changing how we interact from around the world. Instead of me having to fly to Key West in a couple of months to do a keynote, which Lisa and I are going to be doing, there'll be a point in time where we can just pop on our headsets and it's going to feel like we're there. But having said all of that, I think what's interesting coming back to today's technology, Neil, is the ability to use this technology to connect. When I'm doing Zoom mediation, so I'm a private mediator and I mediate Zoom cases via Zoom. What I'll do is you'll be in one breakout room with your client, 2 or 3 other parties will be in other breakout rooms with their clients. And if we reach an impasse, right, what I'll do is I'll say, listen, let's take a 10-minute coffee break, use the bathroom, let's all pop back in 10 minutes, and I'll go over to another tab. And in that other tab, I've already got all the parties' mediation briefs and issues and arguments already uploaded for the mediation. I've got personality profiles on all the different lawyers and parties, depending on the needs of the case, into that same data set. And I can type into it, this is where we are, this is the issue, give me 10 open-ended questions to come back into this mediation to keep the conversation going. And out of those 10 questions, I might have thought about 8 of them, 7 or 6 of them, but there's 2, 3, or 4 that I didn't think about. And so the technology allows me to have some new approaches, maybe some new suggestions to help us reach that final goal that we hadn't talked about. But I come back in as a human being. And I come back in using many of the tips and approaches you share in your books to communicate what the AI told me as a human being to these other parties that are stressed or concerned, or the outcome is going to dictate whether their company is going to be able to exist. And it's because of these additional tools that we're able to get things done during one session instead of, as you and I over the years, listen, folks, we're at an impasse. Why don't everybody come back tomorrow? And we'll continue the mediation. And then you show up for another 4 hours and it doesn't get done. You know what? I want everybody back in here tomorrow. Before you know it, you're juggling your schedule, your calendar, you're rescheduling things. I think AI is giving us new ways to get to the desired solutions of the parties, as long as we don't let it replace what you do and what I do as lawyers when it comes to getting the job done. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic right now that a lot of lawyers are focusing on this technology with, I'm going to have it write my email. I'm going to have it write my blog post. I'm going to have it write my appellate brief, which you might not want to do right now until you check your citations.
Right.
But there's more to it than that. Use it as a coach. Ask your questions. How can I get past this impasse? I have a client coming in this afternoon. This is a hypothetical, who might be a tech gal who has a specific issue. I might say something like, Look, based upon the principles that Neil Goldstein teaches in his book about building relationships, understanding there's a dynamic, there's a wall right now separating this person from hiring my firm. Give me 4 or 5 talking points, 4 or 5 suggestions to get around that wall, to break through that wall, to connect with this person so that I can share with them how I can help her, she and her company. And number two, how I can close the deal. I want them to hire my firm. And so we can use AI for suggestions, for ideas, and solutions to help us complete that human relationship building effort. And that's why I'm embracing all of this technology.
Well, I have no disagreement that AI digital definitely helps us introduce us to new people that we may never have met before. And also it allows us to communicate in a more thoughtful way, I believe. But as you've said, certainly at the end, that, it won't replace what we do, at least not while I'm around. And this is a good segue for me to ask you about younger people, because I deal a lot with younger people. I know you have also. And I was recently at an event and I walk up to people and I introduce myself and say hello. And I ask them, what brings them there? And they say, well, I really had nothing to do. And so I came here. One of their first events, they usually, and the truth is, let's be very honest. The younger generation, including younger lawyers, are used to heavy digital, disproportionate digital. And the idea of face-to-face contact is not really the norm for them, even though we both agree that might very well be the difference between becoming successful and not becoming successful. So if you were talking to young lawyers right now, what would you say to them? And what would you say to them about how to effectively marry, if you will, digital and authenticity? What practical advice would you give them?
Well, I'll tell you what, Neil, as a father of a 30-year-old successful big law lawyer up in Century City, up in LA, AJ's doing fantastic, and also of a 25-year-old son who's working as a post-creative strategist at VaynerMedia in Los Angeles, the last thing either one of them wants to hear is for me to tell them how to do what you just asked me, right? So that's the first thing, is they don't want Neil.
By the way, I got to just stop you for a second to hold that thought, because you probably can hold your thoughts better than me.
I can try.
My son, if I tell him give him any advice, he's in the financial planning industry. It goes in one ear and out the other. But if he goes to a bar and the bartender tells him the same thing, that's it. It's gospel. So I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. Look, Dad, that's not what I heard on the XYZ podcast. That's not the way they roll, right? So, it's all in the approach, I think, right? And it's up to us to figure out how can we communicate our message in a way that's where it's going to land the way we want it to. And right. I do think that with Gen Y and Gen Z, there's a whole new way of communicating, and we need to acknowledge that. And I try to do that when I'm looking at my jury. If it's a lot of young people, then I will approach how I speak and the time that I spend differently than if it's a bunch of older individuals like me. And so it's an interesting dynamic. But here's what I would stress. In your book, and I think this is really important, Neil, because it's invaluable, you share 5 different principles, and it applies to answering your question. The first principle is finding and I'm going to go through this real quick, finding your people, number one. That's super important. Gen Y and Gen Z, they want to find their people. The question is, where can they find them? Number 2, acknowledging mutual needs. What are your mutual needs, understandings, wants, and desires? Number 3, active listening. You want to listen to what the other person has to say. Number 4, valuing face-to-face interactions. And number 5, building common grounds. Having laid out, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I got down here. Okay, right. All right. So having laid all that out there, I think that for young professionals that want to build networks, build relationships, whether it's referral sources or bringing new business into the firm, they really need to double down on those 5 things, but they need to do it in their own way. In other words, I will tell you right now, and I'm around a lot of young people because we're friends with a lot of my kids' friends, right? And they're all doing very, very well. Their idea of networking is different than what you and I grew up understanding networking to be. And I want Gen Y and Gen Z to understand that going to a Laker game or going out to dinner and inviting a client, a potential client, and not talking shop, but just talking about, I'm inviting Neil because he's a Laker fan. We're going to talk basketball. You build connections. And you don't have to sell them on your law firm. You don't have to get them to commit to become a client. What you want to do is just have an amazing evening with someone. And I think once Gen Y and Gen Z understands that dynamic, you're not marketing them and networking them. You're building new relationships. It starts to become fun. And you can go through each of those principles premised around how you carry the conversation. Ask questions. What interests you, Neil? And then stop talking and start listening. Listen to what they're talking about and ask follow-up questions that you actually want to hear answers to. You're speaking from the heart. And I think when Gen Y and Gen Z, who, by the way, I think they've got more on the ball, Neil, at their ages than at least I did when I was their age. I don't know about you, okay? But I'm real comfortable with the quality of human being that's out there right now. Once they understand that connecting and building relationships and expanding their networks can be fun. It can be engaging. It can be actually a part of your day that takes you away from the pleadings and the Zoom arguments and into a whole new arena where you can meet new people and do new things. That's where it starts to get exciting. So that's what I would tell them is kind of give yourself permission to be a little bit different than everyone else your age at the office. And I think over the course of 3 to 5 years, you're going to see just dynamite results because of your efforts today.
I think that's 100% right. And thank you for reminding all of us about that. I remember just another story with my son. I mentioned my son a lot because that's the person I try to get through to as much as I can. I remember during COVID, he had to remotely work from home, and he loved it. He thought it was the greatest thing. I could sit in my pajamas and remotely do what I got to do. And then about a year later, he said, one day he said to me, he says, I'm getting tired of this. He says, I says, what? What's wrong? I thought you loved it. He says, well, I kind of miss the vibe of being around other people at the office. And so it's part of our humanity. We're not meant to be in this world alone. And whether it's in your personal life or it's your work life, of course, there are some people that have to work remotely. I get it. Makes sense. But working, meeting people in person, whether it's at work or somewhere else, is key to your life. Forget about, the law. I mean, I said to somebody recently, I said, you can have a 4-star conversation at a 1-star restaurant. You know how you do that? You know how you do that? You don't talk about the law. Nothing. If you've had the conversation and you didn't talk about the law once, you've had a 4-star conversation. And I hope that resonated with him. It's just, I do think that they are very different. And in some ways, as you said, maybe better, maybe some ways they're not. But I do think that it's part of, our evolutionary process to be with other people. So yeah, I agree that digital has its place, but I also think that when I'm talking to younger people, I say to them, the person that can marry both authenticity and digital will be the successful person. If you could put those two together, and it's not easy. So that brings me to another question I have for you.
So hold that question.
I don't think I
follow up real quick.
I'll try.
Yeah, hold it real quick, because here's what's interesting is, let's say you want to preface a relationship based upon what you just said.
Right.
Gen Y and Gen Z right now, what will happen is they'll get together online on Twitch or on some of the other platforms, and they'll listen to a musician together. Mm-hmm. Okay, they're listening to a concert together. They're participating in video games together, and you can do this with your clients. See, you're still together. You're embracing digital. You're in your pajamas, but you've got new people, new connections, new friends. And what happens is you start there, and then once that starts firing on all cylinders, that's where, hey, Neil, that was awesome. There's a fantastic taco booth down on Venice Beach. It's a 1-star booth, but it's a 5-star environment. Why don't we meet down there Saturday before we go for a run, or before we jump online to do video games? And that's how it starts, right? So we want to meet them where they're comfortable being,
Absolutely.
embrace what they enjoy doing,
Abs-
but then also add to it our layers of, our own unique layers to close that deal. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I do think that what you're saying is what they're doing. It's just in a different way that you and I aren't comfortable, that we're
oh,
not familiar with.
I have to tell you, most clients that I meet now that are younger, I meet them at a coffee place. That's,
Mhm.
they love it. I'm okay with it, and they're very happy. And so that kind of segues into something else, because I'm trying to ask you so much, and
Yeah, I'll keep my answer shorter.
that's all right. That's all right.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
So you've been on just about every platform that has come out. I've seen you on just about every platform, and every so often I see you make some kind of statement, because maybe it's based on burnout, maybe how you feel, that you're going off the grid for a certain amount of time. So I'm thinking, oh boy, and maybe
Mhm.
some of it has to do with the kind of rhetoric that's out there, which I perfectly understand that. But what brings you to that point? And do you think that it's healthy for people to say at some point, you know what, I have to detach, I have to go hang out with my crew, my wife, my kids. We just want to do our own thing for a while, or I just need some peace. Do you think
Mhm.
that's something that you've done, or that's what it appears? And do you recommend that other people think about that as well?
All the above. You have to do what's good for you. I actually am a very happy camper. I love my life, Neil, just so
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of things, run and paddleboard and stuff like that. I love my family. It's all good. You're talking, yeah. I have my moments where normally it's politically oriented, where I just can't take it anymore. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm very disappointed in the education level of a lot of people that also are allowed to vote. And I'll just leave it at that.
Mhm.
And so before the election, I'm like, I'm done. I don't need all this nonsense. I've got too many things to do in my life at my age, right?
Yeah.
So we take a family trip to Amsterdam, which was amazing, right?
Yeah.
And we're in Amsterdam during the inauguration, and I'm sitting there watching this, and I'm like, man, and my daughter comes in, and she's like, Dad, all my friends have read your message that you're done with social. They're counting on you to be their voice. They're counting on you to share facts regarding gaslighting and misinformation.
Yeah.
They don't feel they can do what they see you doing. We want to have you back. And I hope she watches this, because this is the answer to your question. And I told her, no, I'm not interested. I got a lot of other things to do with my life, right? Because you don't understand the DMs, the threats, and things like this. This is real out there, especially when
Right.
you have a large platform. And I just don't need that in my life. But I listened to her, and I listened to my son. I thought to myself and a couple of their friends, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to come back stronger and louder and more direct than ever before. And I'm going to do it on a platform, Neil, that you normally don't see the type of conversation that I'm talking about. And that happens to be over on LinkedIn. And I'm going to leave it at that. We don't need to do a deep dive. It's your show.
Mm.
But I started sharing my thoughts over on LinkedIn, which frankly are business leaders.
Right.
Businesses are making the decisions in the world.
Right.
And the first week, it was a little bit rough. And over the last couple of months, it has been just the opposite. I've obviously tapped into a need, into a desire, into a message that's resonating with a lot of people. And I am just enjoying the heck out of it, Neil, just so you know. In other words, I've given myself permission to talk about something I'm comfortable with
Right.
talking about through the lens of a lawyer. And Neil and I are trained, and the lawyers listening to this, we're trained to differentiate fact from fiction. This is part of the training in law school. This is part of what you learn when you're representing clients and litigating cases. You understand what's bullshit, and you
Right.
understand what isn't. And so I'm trying to add that particular aspect to the breaking news stories. And you talked about newsjacking at the beginning of the show. I'm newsjacking breaking political news in a way that I'm comfortable with doing on a platform that primarily wasn't known for that type of content. And it's exploding. And so circling back in a good way.
Yeah.
So circling back to what we talked about at the very beginning, what you want to do is you want to be unique. You want to be memorable. You want to create content that people will talk about if you want your brand to expand. And Neil, by doing this, I've made more new, positive, dynamic, fascinating relationships with movers and shakers around the world over the last 60 to 90 days on LinkedIn
Yeah.
than I have in the last 15 years on social media. That's the magnitude of the positive impact.
I,
And so whatever anyone listening to this, whatever your interest is, maybe maybe it's tennis, maybe it's golf, maybe it's knitting, maybe it's politics, maybe it's law. Don't be afraid to find your community. Don't be afraid
absolutely.
to share your thoughts because we only go through life once.
Yep.
And I don't want to end up when it's all said and done and look back and say, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I say that? Why didn't I reach out to so and so and help when I could? And I think you'll find an audience who respects you for that and people who will hire you for that. For example, there were a couple of law firms that stood strong and stood tall against Trump's
Right.
executive orders, and they fought
Right.
him in court.
Right.
And I'm proud to say that I was a signatory on 2 amicus briefs supporting those law firms and their constitutional rights. And I got to tell you, I have connected with more amazing lawyers who feel the same way I do. And guess what? They're also referral sources. They're also
Right.
bringing new mediations into the law firm. So many people, Neil, are so worried about what other people think about them. They're so worried about if they say the wrong thing or whose feelings are going to hurt. And like, oh my God, there comes a point in time where there's a line in the sand, people. Don't be afraid to step over it and do what you think is right.
And there's also, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a sense of freedom that you get when you just say, okay, I'm doing this. And, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But there's a certain sense of freedom. You don't have that, you don't have that weight on your back that, oh, I got to watch what I say. I have to kind of know who my audience is or whatever the case may be. It's liberating.
It's so liberating. It's like picking the right client, accepting the right case as a
Right.
lawyer.
Right.
If you're accepting cases and representing people you don't believe or
Right.
whose values don't match with yours,
Right.
you're going to age quickly. You're not going to sleep at night, and you're not going to be a happy camper. But if you're selective about who you represent and the people whose lives you want to make a difference in, and it matters to you, even more so to them sometimes, right? Sometimes we really get involved with what we're doing. That's where the magic happens.
Right.
And it's liberating. It's living a fulfilled life. And it really breaks my heart when I see people bending over backwards to just do the opposite. They want to please everyone, and they're wondering why things aren't happening or clicking as quickly as they would like it to be, because you can't please everyone.
You
But you
know,
know who you can please? People who share your same visions, views, and passions.
it goes back to, and I wrote about this early in my book, was you have to allow yourself to be authentic, whoever that is inside of you. And once you do that, which is something I did, you can't imagine how many people embrace you that you never thought would embrace you, how many people actually do that. So I think that's really remarkable advice, whether you're a lawyer or you're not a lawyer. And just circling back to lawyering, young lawyers, a big pain point, which I don't think we talked about, is finance, money. And so many of them have, in my opinion, they have disillusions or hallucinations about what kind of money they think they're going to make. And part of the problem is social media. When you're constantly looking to your right or to your left, or you're swiping to your right or to your left, whatever it is that you're doing, you're constantly thinking how much better the next person is. And so from a practical point of view, how would you suggest that a young lawyer spend their money in terms of marketing?
I would spend my money building relationships one-on-one, the things that you talk about, Neil. And I'm not just saying this because this is your podcast, but you and I, the reason we resonate with each other is we've had the same mindset since day one. I mean, it was obvious when I met you. And I think what I would like them to do is do the same thing my mom and dad did back in the day. And that is understand that every single relationship that you are participating in and you enjoy and you want to build and nurture, right? The people that you select as being someone that you want in your life, personally or professionally, that's the investment. And picking up the phone or sending a text or shooting an email, whatever it takes to build that relationship, it doesn't have to take money. And circling around full circle, though, once you do this each and every day and have fun doing it, people are going to start noticing that you're in social media, you're commenting on their posts. You're adding value in and engaging in what's important to them, whether
Right.
it's a local community event, whether it's a comment that they make about a political issue. You're there for them. You've got their back. I think people appreciate that. And, Bob Berg's book, The Go-Giver, really does do a good job, Neil, of explaining the power of giving and giving and giving without the expectation of receiving anything in return.
Right.
And I think once you learn how to do that, the clouds open up and the sunshine above shines down on you. The other thing I would suggest is success isn't about money. In other words, it can open up a lot of doors for you, but I think what you want to look at is create an environment, whether you're working in big law or you have your own practice, where you can decide what you want to do, when you want to do it, with who you want to do it with.
Right.
And for years, Neil, you know this, but a lot of listeners, Lisa and I met in law school.
Right.
She's my partner. She's Wilson of Jackson and Wilson. Don't tell anybody, but she's the senior partner. She makes all the important decisions, all right?
I think everybody knows that.
Yeah, everybody knows that. But I got to tell you, for the first 20 years, when we were coming in together and doing all the stuff, on Thursdays, we would grab lunch. We'd block out our calendar. We're in court. And on Thursdays, every week, we grab lunch and then we go see a movie in the afternoon.
That's great.
And then and being self-employed, did we make money that afternoon while we were doing that? Well, the way we were set up is the office was still running. So yeah, I mean, it still kind of ran itself, but probably not. But we were working on our relationship and enjoying our lives together. And then when the kids came along and I was coaching them in sports, I purposefully blocked off from 3:30 on in the afternoon. We're not setting any appointments. We're not, I want to be there coaching my kids or being on the sidelines watching. And that has value. It has value with being there for your kids and enjoying your life. And so it's about combining all of these things into a doable daily, weekly, and monthly type of game plan. And I don't have goals, Neil. I'm not writing all this stuff down.
Right. Yep.
You start to get a sixth sense to how your day should be going. If I'm in a really bad mood, I'll avoid taking phone calls. I'll avoid responding to something. Like, I'm not firing on all cylinders. I don't need to be engaging with opposing counsel on this issue.
Right.
And it's okay to do that, right? In other words, when you need to be on your A game, make sure you're on your A game. And if you're not, that's okay. The sun's going to come up tomorrow. It can probably wait until tomorrow. And I just would like people to kind of take a step back and take a deep breath and really think about, what do you want for your life, especially the lawyers out there, and really take control of the decisions you make. Understand the power of saying no. And I think if you do all these things and you excel at what you're doing, let's not lose track of, be good at what you're doing. Put in the time.
Yeah.
But if you're good at what you're doing and you do everything else that Neil talks about in his books and what we've talked about today, the money will find you, right? The financial benefits will find you.
I think one of the most important things that you said in all of that, which it was all really good, was how you and Lisa, and I'm sure you still do the same thing, maybe differently. You find the time to be with each other and forget about work, is taking off that day and just hanging out together and going to a movie or whatever it is. And you made, you made the moment just count. And that's success. Obviously, it's defined differently by everybody, but I find that to be successful, and something that I did as well in the last few years. I've pivoted from my day-to-day role as an attorney, and even though I still practice, I don't do the same stuff anymore, and because I don't want to. Quite honestly, I'd rather be doing other things like writing books and getting to meet new people and connecting and doing this show. And it's simply about, how do you want to leave this planet? And I hate to put it that way, but that is really how do you want people to remember you? Because at the end of the day, and I don't mean to be morbid, but at the end of the day, nobody was going to want to know what you got on your tax returns, how much you made. Nobody cares about line 14 or line 12, whatever it is. Were you a good father? Were you a good husband? Good provider? Were you a philanthropist? Were you charitable? And so I think everything you're saying is right on point. Very, very, very important. Are those values that were instilled in you growing up?
I'm guessing my parents, if they were still alive, would say that's what they tried to instill in me, Neil. But like you know, I was kind of a rebel back in the day.
Yes, I
I
remember you
did my
talking
own
about that.
did my own thing. I was lucky enough to turn a 4-year degree into a 5-year experience at the University of Arizona,
Right,
and I'd do it again in a second. Now, in
right,
all honesty, I switched majors from engineering to business, but it's just something where I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I will say once I started practicing and I opened up my own practice on day one, I realized what you just said is the way I needed to approach things because I met so many lawyers that had been practicing maybe 8 or 10 years who were unhappy and burned out. See, I was clerking for a bunch of different lawyers on a floor of a building, and some of you might know, some were pretty well known. And but I noticed that very few of them were happy. And I was pretty active in sports in Southern California, playing basketball every day down at Laguna
right,
Beach and stuff like this. And I realized the guys on the court right now who probably don't have a pot to piss in, right?
right. They're
Who are
happy.
all potential criminal clients, by the way, criminal
Yeah,
defense clients. They're 10 times happier
right.
than these successful lawyers in the high rise. And so I kind of put the two and two together. And frankly, Neil, Lisa, once we started practicing together, she was out 4 years before she came in. She was a defense attorney. She made me pump the brakes and say, listen, this is not the way we're going to, weekends are for us, evenings are for us. And it was really good advice. And so I kind of just figured it out as we went along. But hopefully people will listen to what you and I have talked about. And instead of taking 10 years to learn these lessons, they can learn these lessons, in a week, right? By practicing them. And people need to understand we're going to make mistakes. You're going to have to pull all-nighters. Things happen in life, right? But the key is to take what's just happened, analyze it, and then figure out how can you not make that same mistake again. And you've heard me talk about Mike the Milkman, my late father-in-law. He was a very
Yes.
successful guy. Was loading milk crates. When he got out of high school and 2 years of community college on the back of a milk truck. And when I met him, he and his wife owned a dairy distributorship in Lancaster, California, and sold it and retired at 52. Then he turned around and opened up his own bank. Very successful couple. And what Mike told me one day was, the 3 keys to success. Mike the Milkman delivers his 3 keys to success. And we can wrap this up with Mike the Milkman. And he pulled me aside and said, Mitch, here's what you need to understand. Number one, take care of yourself. Take care of your health, both mentally and physically, because unless you're healthy, you're not going to be any good to my daughter, to my grandkids someday, and to your clients and customers. And I said, okay, Mike. He goes, number two, take care of my daughter. Take care of your family. Take care of your neighbors and friends. Number three, take care of your business and your practice. Try to keep things in that order. And if you do that over the long term, everything's going to fall into place. I think that was some of the best advice I ever got, Neil, was from Mike the Milkman, who didn't have a law degree, but had a degree in people skills. He had a degree in common sense, and he had a degree on, welcoming me into the family, making me feel part of the family, and really giving me a compass to then use for the next 30 plus years in the practice to make the right decisions at the right time. And you know what, Neil? If I didn't, the sun comes up tomorrow morning and we can start all over. So it's all good.
That's great, and a great way to kind of wind down the show with Mike the Milkman, and great advice. And I have heard you mention him before. This is not the first time you've mentioned him, so I imagine he made a big impression on you. And I could see just by looking at you that this was a real important person in your life. So as we wind up, I want to thank you for being here. You're just unbelievable. You could just talk about anything and everything, and I love all of the advice that you've given us. And I'd love for you to tell anybody who wants to get in contact with you or wants to know more about Mitch and wants to hear more of the same stuff that we just heard. How do they find you? How do they contact you? Although it's very easy to find this guy. He's everywhere. But
Right.
why don't you tell everybody?
Well, look, my website right now is mitch-jackson.com, little hyphen between Mitch Jackson. Go to mitchjackson.com, whatever. Hit me up. And by the way, Neil, thanks for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. I always enjoy talking with you about the things that we talk about, and your books are fantastic. And if anyone wants to continue the conversation, just type my name into Google and you'll find me. And right now I'm spending a lot of time over on LinkedIn, and I'm spending a lot of time over on my Substack. So it's mitchthelawyer.substack.com.
I noticed the Substack. That's great. Excellent. Really, really good. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Neil. Take care.
Take care. If something here hits home for you, don't keep it to yourself. Tap subscribe, drop a comment, and share this with a lawyer who needs to really hear it. This is That One Lawyer Podcast. See you next time.